float off.
Okay.
And I say, go sleep under an umbrella. Go relax. And now the subconscious mind is listening very intently to what I have to say. The subconscious mind is where all creativity resides and all creativity exists, and all new learning and all old learning are stored. It's literally there. And what I can do with hypnosis with people, and with their permission, is we can do age regression. We can go back to a time that perhaps there was something that needs resolved, or an issue that's bothering them, something that's incomplete.
Sure. Okay.
So we'll go back in time and do that. And as an adult, I will say, now, how would you like to have handled that? So they can talk just like in a dream. They can talk anytime I ask them a question. They can say yes or no. And there's sometimes a little bit of a delay in the response, or I can have them nod yes or no, raise a finger and say I'm not sure, or whatever. And we do that all in advance. But as they do this, it's possible we can go back to a problem, or and find out really it wasn't that great a problem. We've made it a great problem in our own mind that now is affecting us. My teacher had a bad day one day, and then she told me, you're not a very good student, so sit down.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
we take that into our life as being, I'm a bad person, not just a bad student for the day or for that moment.
Sure.
So we go back and find out, really, that's all the teacher wanted to say, is she's having a bad day, and sit down, please, because I'm not feeling so well, whatever.
Sure.
But we interpreted that as being a bad person.
Wow. So when you are hypnotized, okay, you are in a different state of mind, truly,
Yes.
than you are sitting here talking with me at this moment, right?
The focus, it's called focus concentration. You may or may not have you may not hear anything in the background. You may not hear other extraneous kind of things, noises, background sounds. But your focus is on perhaps my voice or the experience that you're going through. And I'm suggesting perhaps you go to the beach or the ocean and walk on the sand and feel the warmth of the sand on your feet.
Sure.
Feel the ocean pulling at your feet as you're standing in the surf, and then feel the sand being removed from the bottom of your feet. And as you get closer and closer to that level of relaxation, then I'm going to start talking to your subconscious mind and saying, now that you're listening, your subconscious mind is listening very intently. And that problem that you've had with smoking, that desire to stop smoking, is now such that you no longer have any urge or inkling or desire to smoke cigarettes from this point forward. Anytime you have any urge or desire or inkling to smoke cigarettes, you'll simply find that all you have to do is take yourself right back to that beach and calm yourself and relax. And under stress, you no longer have a desire to that whatever suggested of you that you have control of, and you would not rob a bank, your values and all those things that you that your religious upbringing, your values, your judgment, your good judgment are not compromised as a result of going to hypnosis or going into hypnosis. So basically, if I said to you to run out into traffic, you would probably laugh at me and tell me to do it instead.
Okay.
So
okay.
you don't lose your ability to rationalize or reason or use your good judgment, if you will.
Sure, because there's an awful lot. Well, the Manchurian, candidate or whatever that they did, and it was a book, it was a movie. I actually haven't read many books, but that's one book that I did read, and it's one movie I've seen. And you speculate at times all these international powers that can somehow control somebody. Now, if they can, it's probably due to a much more severe form of indoctrination rather than some sort of a hypnotist.
Well, I would venture brainwashing would probably come to mind, and certainly, there's things that are outside of my realm, but there's things that I have read about various programs for people who. The phone call is made and the person is given the key word or a sound, and to act on the post-hypnotic suggestion that's been made, whether it's to bark like a dog or like a chicken. But I never have, and clinically we don't do those kind of things. That's more stage kind of things that are done, but. Most people who are going on stage also know that there's a certain amount of exhibition, if you will, of their behaviors, and so they're quite willing to do that under the guise of hypnosis. Some people are very willing to be hypnotized and behave according to the script. The audience expects fun. The audience expects it to be, entertained, and the individuals who are now on stage are expected to be the actors.
Sure.
So.
Are those people really hypnotized though, or are they just acting at that point?
Most generally they are selected from the audience in advance to find out if they have a suggestibility or a hypnotizability, and those who are not, or those who are resistant or reluctant to do those things, they're sent back to the audience. So there's some screening done in advance.
Okay, all right. So when you see that happening, you can really you probably understand that it is some sort of a performance being done for your entertainment, whether it's really a hypnotized person or whether it's somebody that's just kind of acting along. Nobody really knows.
Exactly. And a lot of it is, quite honestly, they're in a somnambulistic state, which is one of the deeper levels of hypnosis. And stage people who are very adept at this stuff, they know that they have someone in just a matter of moments. And when they find these people and they go through the process of the basic hypnosis in advance of their stage. So most of these folks, I never know when they walk into my office how hypnotizable they will be. I have a couple of small, just short tests that I can have them take. Did you use your imagination when you were a child? Did you do you go into road trance when you travel? Do you find that you've went 100 miles and you didn't realize it? And those kind of things, and they certainly are cues or tips to me that the person has some hypnotizability. Yeah. Everyone can be hypnotized if they're willing to be hypnotized.
That's amazing. That because again, I would be one of those people that would say you can't do that. Yeah. But I'm also in that other category. I use my imagination all the time. Yeah. I do doze off on the road, and it still stay in focus of what I'm doing. I still see what's going on, but I do lose track of that 40 minutes that I drove to Toledo yesterday because I've done it so many times, and I just did it, basically. So I do understand that, and it would be an interesting situation. All right, you were telling me off air about a mass hypnosis event that you had one time, and I guess that has always again been another one of those questions, because you hear we're going to bring 100 people in and we're going to hypnotize them all, and you're all going home and you'll never smoke again, and you're all going to be skinny by the time next time I see you.
Those are few and far between, and certainly my experience was I was to present to a group and just to do an overview of what hypnosis was and what hypnosis does and what it can and propose to do, and the introduction was that I would be hypnotizing the whole audience. Well, I had never done that before, and that was quite a surprise to me that I was to do that. So I did have them do a simple exercise. It's a basic induction proceeding. It's a induction that takes you into a real relaxed, calm place, and that's where I took the audience. And I had the back row, I said, please pay attention very closely, because the front row has a distinct advantage of being able to see and hear better. So please pay very close attention. That tuned them into the fact that we would be doing hypnosis, and I think it presupposed that they would be hypnotized. And okay. So I just did a simple exercise that I did with them. And I had them do some deep breathing. I had them close their eyes and then imagine that they were someplace special, that they were in their own special place, and whether it was in their backyard, whether it was at the ocean, whether it was in the mountains or the forest or wherever it was. And I gave them those kind of suggestions. And a little deepening, which is called a deepener, going down the steps to a level of deeper relaxation. And as they proceeded for 5 minutes or so, I found that the whole audience seemed to be quite in tune with everything I did. I counted up to 5, and I re-alerted everyone, and the experience for everyone, it seemed, was very positive. I asked the one lady who was standing beside me, or sitting beside me at the podium, I said, did you notice the audience, how did they do? And she said, I don't know, I had my eyes closed and I didn't hear anything. So apparently, for people who... she did go on to say that the audience has a lot of stressors. They were probably looking for something to relax and give them a reason to slow down and relax. So that just was opportune for me as well as for the audience.
That's amazing. How did you come about hypnotism? Why did you start? I mean, when you came out of Siena College, if somebody would have said, hey, 30 years from now you're going to be hypnotizing people and helping them with weight loss and stopping smoking and everything, I would have to think you might say, okay, but I can't imagine that was your goal coming out of school.
No, about 8 years ago, I had a gentleman come to my office, and I routinely ask about smoking, and I said, he said, I quit smoking after 20 years. And I said, how did you do that? And he said, I tried hypnosis. And I said, wow, that sounds so interesting. Smoking is most of us know, is just not good. It's just not a healthy thing, and it will take us out of this world prematurely. So I immediately started looking online for a corporation or an organization that would teach me hypnosis. And I connected with ASH, the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis, which was founded by, now I've lost the gentleman's name, but it'll come back here in a minute. Sure.
I have that problem all the time. Can you hear that with hypnosis at all?
maybe I need to practice a little of my own. So it took a long time. Actually, it took quite a few years to get the certification, to complete the approved consultants, which is the title of the level that you've achieved. And so it's an ongoing thing. Yeah. The trainings annually. I go to the trainings and read the books, and we get the annual or the quarterly reports online. And so you read a lot. You learn a lot from watching.
Yeah, yeah. So. Are people more likely nowadays to be open to hypnotism, or has the idea changed at all over the course of the time you've been doing it?
Word of mouth.
Okay.
People talk, and if it worked for me, then they'll tell people it worked for me. If it didn't work for them, they tell people it didn't work for them. So a lot of the people that I get are word of mouth. Mm-hmm. So usually they say, I've tried everything. I've tried Chantix. I've tried acupuncture. I've tried everything possible, but I've never tried hypnosis. So you're my last stop.
Yeah, yeah. Because they're addictive. I mean, cigarettes are,
Yeah.
are highly addictive.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, that's the other side of that magic thing that you're holding in your hand.
Well, the numbers of poisons in cigarettes are in the thousands, and you're not just smoking nicotine anymore. The tobacco companies have if you ever read the tobacco settlement, it's quite interesting because there's billions of dollars that were exchanged for a certain amount of leeway with their warnings on those packages. And there's 4 basic warnings on the packages, and in Britain it just says tobacco kills. That's
okay.
what's on their tobacco. Ours is it could cause, or it may cause, or it's whatever.
Sure.
So a large part of the population recognizes that it's bad, or it's addictive, or it's harming them. But it is also a habit, and a habit can be resolved in 21 days or less. So they say it takes at least 21 days to formulate a new habit. So when I suggest to folks that you will no longer have a desire, urge, or an inkling to smoke, you will have a desire to walk outside. You will find that sunshine, or you'll find that drinking a cold glass of water feels the same thing, and then stress or anxiety that you felt previously and it prompted you to smoke a cigarette is no longer there. It just doesn't, and it's a post-hypnotic suggestion that you now will want to drink a cold drink of water. You will now want to have go out and take a walk in the sunshine. You'll find calling friends or reading a good book, doing something other than is more appropriate and more healthy than any the cigarettes that you may have ever tasted. So I'll also do a little bit the cigarettes tasting a little like something else.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So you suggest that they don't taste good.
They don't taste
You
good.
take that first puff and you're like, oh, ooh,
Yeah. Yes.
that's not good at all.
Yeah.
Unlike the normal, the drag that you would take off the cigarette where you go,
Yeah.
relief. Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah, aversion therapy is in essence is what it amounts to. It tastes bad, it looks bad, it smells bad, and in essence, what you have in your fingers is something very vile, and you just want to throw it away.
Yeah, that's amazing. That is amazing. All right, Mike Freeman is our guest right now. Mike, can you hang around for another 10 minutes or so with me?
Sure.
I need to take a little break, do some O&N news. When we come back, I've still got a couple more questions. We're talking hypnosis here on the Medical Hour today. The medical specialty clinics at the Bryan Hospital and the community health professionals are bringing it to you here on the Q 96.5 FM. Perfect.
Did you make a New Year's resolution? Elwood Staffing did. They want to help you find a job. Elwood Staffing has openings in Pioneer, West Unity, Fayette, Archibald, Defiance, Butler, and many other areas. All shifts are available. Pay rates may vary per company. Help Elwood be successful with their New Year's resolution. Call them today at 419-519-3320 or stop in at 11.
So does it work
Street, Bryan.
for
I wasn't really sure what to do.
other things? I mean, we got a major opioid crisis right now. Okay, is it a potential to help with something like that? Or
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't promote it as such. I just, I've had people who've alcohol. They'll come in for smoking pot, dipping tobacco, dipping chewing tobacco, and it's the same principle. I mean, everything's sort of like it's just changed the name and use something else. I mean, the verbiage is a little different, but yeah, everything that is a bad habit or a habit that you want to correct or you want to change. I had a father who came over from one of the local schools. His kid was a football player. He wanted to play college football pretty badly.
Okay.
And I worked with that kid. I want to say maybe 6 or 7 occasions, that he would go into this and do self-hypnosis. I taught him self-hypnosis, and that's relatively easy. And then when he would play football, he would do his own self-hypnosis.
Okay.
And his focus was more intense. His concentration was more. He said it was just like I knew in advance of where the play was going.
I'll be darned. Okay.
And so he was so tuned in, and his focus was so keen I ended up going to college. I don't know if he's playing. So
I'll be darned. Okay.
Smaller college, but
sure.
You know,
that's still a great achievement if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, I've not worked with a lot of sport performance, but I worked with one young lady who was she was a discus and a shot putter, some college up in the East Coast.
Okay.
And that's where she came in, and she wanted to try it. And then this father whose son wanted to go into play in, I think in Division II or III.
Okay, all right. Yeah. Is he a Bryan kid or is he from?
No, he was. I want to say Eden.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That is amazing. We'll do this. We got a couple commercials. The network side will play.
I really like that picture. That's Doug Feely's, isn't it?
Yeah, you know Doug.
Yeah,
obviously, you're a striker guy. You got to know Doug.
Yeah.
Yeah, Doug and I, we're very good friends. My wife is an artist. She's a painter as well, and I don't have any of her paintings in here, which is something I got to make.
Now,
Kathy Funderdome.
Oh,
you know
gosh,
Kathy?
yes. My wife is Jody Freeman. I don't know if you know
Oh, okay,
Jody.
yeah.
She works with the Bryan Area Foundation.
Yeah.
And she speaks very highly of Kathy. So yeah.
She has 2 or 3 things in the hospital there. My wife does at the hospital.
Yeah.
With flowers.
Jody does the framing. I mean, my wife has a framing shop in our basement. And so she does a lot of framing for the hospital, and we don't advertise it. She's busy enough; she doesn't really want to.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I understand.
Yeah, I think she's framed some stuff for your wife.
That's possible too. Yeah. That's possible too. We came over. I had a building in downtown Bryan when I first got here. I was going through a divorce, and when I got here, I told the realtor that. He said, "Oh, we got a nice house out here. We got a nice house." I said, "Man, I don't want a house. I don't want to cut grass. I don't want to trim bushes. I don't want to shovel snow. I want something that is relatively maintenance free." And I ended up with the building, which had gamers in it around the alley on High Street, and that was mine when I first came here 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. Okay. And so I was living downtown. I'd met Kathy. Doug was teaching at Defiance College at the time. She was teaching at Defiance College at the time as well. And they came up for the Jubilee one night, and he brought his class. And the idea with the class was, I'm giving you a big old canvas, okay? You got your paint. We're going to be here for probably 2 or 3 hours, okay? And by the time you walk home, I want a painting, okay? Doesn't have to be perfect. Doesn't have to, there's things that you're going to deal with it, but you're going to have to paint something in that time, and it's going to be done. When we walk away, it's done. Yeah. Whether it needs fixed or tweaked or whatever, it's done because it's just what we're doing tonight. And just to show you, I'm going to do one too.
That's the one he did.
So that was the Jubilee in downtown Bryan in 2.5 hours, according to Doug Feely.
Yeah.
Which is, again, nobody that was in his class could come even close to something like that, but there's a guy who is very good at what he does and is capable of knocking something like that out, so it's kind of cool. All right, here we go. We're down to the last. We'll do another 10 minutes or so, and I'll get you out of here. Okay?
All right.
Back here on the Medical Show with Mike Freeman today, and we're talking hypnosis, and interesting. Boy, I tell you what, I've gotten a whole new appreciation for this right now, and I've got some bad habits too, so I might have to come see you. Do insurance companies pay for hypnosis, Mike? Can you get a policy like that? Or
typically, no.
Yeah, that's what I kind of wonder.
Yeah. But the employee assistance programs will pay for them sometimes because they want one of their employees to quit smoking, or they know the risk involved, or they know that the eventual cost is going to be so great as an employee, they're going to take on the risk anyway, or the costs, and so I do have companies who will pay for it, and I think the costs are just because you asked that. I think the cost is like $128 for the initial session, and it's a 90-minute session.
Okay.
So
normally, is it more than one session to take care of a problem, or what do you find?
A lot of times it is one session. I can tell whether the person's going to do well, but as a rule, I have a 3 sessions set up. I do 3 sessions, a follow-up with just to see how they did, usually within 3 days. And the 3 days is the most critical of the time frame. Mints, gum, suckers.
Sure.
Dum-dum suckers are my number one, I think, giving them a handful out the door and, saying, the suckers drink lots of fluids, especially water. And have those available, toothpicks included, whatever that you can put in your mouth instead of that cigarette.
Sure.
So that's as far as making payment. They set up a program, or they set it up that you can pay it in payments, or they accept credit card or whatever. But
yeah.
I guess I break it down and say, to the employers sometimes is, you can give the employees a Christmas bonus, because if you figure out if they smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day and their cigarettes are $15 for the 2 packs, multiply that times 365, and suddenly they have quite a Christmas bonus in place.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that at all. Another thing you talked about was weight loss. Is another successful use of hypnosis, or is it not quite as likely that you'll lose weight if you're hypnotized?
Well, everybody's different.
Sure.
They really are, and I say how committed you are to smoking or stop smoking, how committed you are to weight management is indicative of how well you will do.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
One lady I worked with, she lost 60 pounds. Now, what we found, because I do a pretty comprehensive assessment, is that she wasn't sleeping well, and we got her a sleep study. We suggested a sleep study, and she went into the sleep study and found that she had sleep apnea.
Okay.
And the sleep study suggested that perhaps why she was snacking with sweets throughout her day was to simply keep her energy up, so she'd have enough energy to go about her day. So thus she was gaining weight and not burning calories. So when we found that out, she was doing much better. And so we look for other things that are also involved, from how you eat, what you eat, where you eat, when you eat. And some people eat because they're stressed, some people because they're nervous, some people because they're bored. So we try to change some of those suggestions to include things that's going to be beneficial to the person instead of eating. And if they do eat or snack, we'll say, I'll suggest that you'll eat the fruits and the vegetables, and those vegetables are things that are good for you.
Okay.
Those cold snacks, those things that you enjoy anyway, and that have very little calories, and so changing again the habits of eating, or the habits of how they manage their stress, or their boredom, or their worries, or their anxieties. And for a lot of people, it's just a change and a gradual change, because obviously it didn't happen overnight, and neither will it happen that I will correct that overnight.
Sure, no doubt. You can't make me not like a cookie, can you?
Oh, no.
I mean, that's not a... Okay,
No.
That's good, dude, because, I mean, you said, you pick up the cigarette and it tastes bad. Well, I am a cookieaholic. If I have no bad habits, and I have plenty of them, okay? But my worst is probably that. If there's a plate of cookies sitting there, there's 3 or 4 of them in my pocket. You know what I mean?
Cookies are a necessity.
That's what I thought, too. I'm proud that we see things the same way.
But in moderation.
All right, let's tackle a big one, because there's such an opioid problem in this world nowadays. Is there the ability to aid that at all, from your perspective?
I think a large part of why people relapse is stress. And
Sure.
if you'll look at it from that perspective, whether it's alcohol or drugs, a large part of why they relapse is the stress of finances, or stress of relationships, or the stress of finances, whatever it is that the person is struggling with. They go back to what they know and what makes them feel good. It's like any other habit, if you will. Now we need to find something that's going to replace the habit, and whether it's exercise, whether it's a hobby, an interest, music, dance, whether it's work, whether it's training, whether it's education, we intervene on that part of it, and it's a behavioral changes as readily as it is anything. And of course, there are addictive substances, but we live in a world of addictive substances.
Sure.
We're not all addicted, and so making a decision to have the first drink, or first shot, or the first pill is also a conscious decision that maybe we can influence.
Now, if you have been successful with me in whatever I came to you for, cigarettes, drugs, weight loss, whatever it might be. Is this a forever cure, or do I need to come back for an upgrade every now and then?
Well, if you are in fear of relapse, or if you feel that you're going to slip, I've had people say, I did so well until, I stopped smoking when I was pregnant with my youngest, and then I started, not soon after, the birth of my child. Wish I would never done that. Well, again, if they can quit for that birth of the child, they can also quit for life. If they can stop smoking for 8 hours at the workplace, they can stop smoking for the other 16 hours of their day. So it's just it's almost granting themselves permission to go back to a bad habit by allowing themselves to say, well, it's into my day, I'm all stressed out. Instead of looking for other ways to manage it, they go back to what they know or what's familiar to them. And cigarettes are readily available. Mm-hmm. They're at every gas station and grocery. So we do have a tendency to go back to what we're familiar with.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And for some people, it's just a lifelong problem, and they're not going to get through it. There's just no way in the world. You have to be ready, though. I think that what I'm hearing from you is you have to be open to that change. If you're not going to be open to that change, you're going to fail. There's no doubt.
If you're open to it and you're committed to it, you're going to stand a better chance of surviving and making it happen. And I suggest to people at some point, and while they're in hypnosis, is that you've decided to live. Mm-hmm. You've made a decision that you wish to live longer and a healthier life. You want to be there for those grandchildren who are going to graduate and who are going to walk down the aisle. And I really emphasize those things that they tell me in my assessment. Why is it you want to stop smoking?
Sure.
Is it just for health? Do you want to live longer? Do you want to be around? And they'll say, I want to be there for my grandchildren. I want to be there for my great-grandchildren. I want to retire and go to the Caribbean. I want to go someplace fun. I want to travel.
Yeah.
And this is something that I use when we do the hypnosis. Now you've made a decision to live and to travel and to have fun and enjoy your grandchildren. I re-emphasize that while they're in the hypnosis state, and the subconscious mind picks up on it, and it becomes less of a desire to smoke or to whatever the habit is, and more of a desire to live a healthier life, to live that longer life.
That's amazing. You've helped athletes as well. We were talking offline.
Yeah, I had a young man who came in a couple of years ago who wanted to be. He was a football player, and he and his father were very committed to the idea because they'd read some books about what the professionals in the college level were doing, and he wanted to be able to be able to focus and to have any advantage that he could. So I taught him to do self-hypnosis. And the self-hypnosis is so easily taught, and we all do it. Like I said earlier, we already do it with music, and we do it with travel or whatever. But being able just to sit down on the couch and take some deep breaths and go to a nice deep level of relaxation, for some people it's really difficult. Just to sit down for us sometimes is very hard.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I know people who just can't slow down.
Yeah. So this young man, I taught him to do self-hypnosis. He goes on the playing field, and he literally envisions or has a visualization or intuitively gets in tune to the game, does his self-hypnosis, and he said to me that he felt like he knew in advance those things that were coming, or he had this cue that this was going to happen. He was so really engaged in the game and the concentration level, and again, all hypnosis is focused concentration, and that's what he was doing exactly. So he did very well, and I understand he went on to play Division II or III football. So that's a success story. And I haven't worked with too many sports performance folks, but that's just one area that hypnosis seems to find itself.
Wow. We are just about out of time, and we asked how long, and an hour goes really quickly, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
If somebody wants to catch you and contact you, Mike, how would they get a hold of you?
My direct line is 419-630-2125, or just call the hospital and ask to speak to someone, and one of the counselors, either myself or Tammy Cup. Yeah. And again, it's 419-630-2125.
Mike Freeman has been our guest today, and I'll tell you what, one of these days I might just pop in. I've got a couple bad habits I need to break. and maybe that would be it, just to see. It might be worth the money just to see if you could hypnotize me. How's that?
We would be willing to give her our best effort.
Oh man, I tell you, I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate what you do. I think life can be so hard for so many people, and anything we can do to maybe help on a day-to-day basis is a wonderful thing.
Hey, thank you very much for having me, Jim. And the next time I'll just volunteer Tammy to come and do this. She's excellent at what she does as well. So
fantastic. Well, we will get Tammy Cup in here as well. Mike Freeman has been our guest in the Medical Hour today, and we appreciate him, all the counseling work he does, and also if you're into hypnosis or would like to know a little bit more about it, you can find out about it right here in Bryan, because the community health professionals and the medical specialty clinics at the Bryan Hospital are all here to save you and help you every day of the week, and fill in. And I've got him next week. Maybe you can give me a tip as to how I hypnotize Phil while I've got him here for a minute or two. Is that possible? You ever had Phil hypnotized at all?
No, he stays away from that office. So.
Well, you and I need to get together for lunch, and maybe I can use some of your secrets here to get Phil hypnotized. It doesn't take much to get him to talk, though. He's a pretty good conversationalist. There's no doubt about that. Hour is over. It's hard to imagine. We thank Mike Freeman today. We also thank the medical specialty clinics of the Bryan Hospital and the community health professionals for bringing it to you every week at this time right here on the Q. Back to a little music. I've got Kevin Maynard coming in to join us in the 11 o'clock hour. All right.
Well,
that works.
Hey, well, thank you very much.
Enough of that. Kevin Maynard is my guest today, and he is the utility director with Bryan Municipal Utility, and I have been looking forward to this day for quite a while. Kevin, welcome in.
Oh, thanks, Jim. Thanks.
It's good to have you here.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity.
You know what? You are you're a name that I have. We've met a time or two.
Oh
here
yeah.
and there,
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
But it's generally been on a out in a social setting.
Yeah.
Okay. Because you
Yeah.
play music with a lot of guys that I know.
Sure.
And every now and then you'll pop up, and there you'll be on stage with John Reichley or
Yeah.
Doug Feely or
Yeah.
a number of the folks that I've kind of met when I first got around here.
Yeah.
And so I met you somewhat socially to start with, and
Right.
now it's great to have you back here in Bryan professionally.
Yeah. Well, it's great to be back too. I appreciate the opportunity to come back here and be a part of the community again.
Tell me a little bit about Kevin Maynard, because you are a Northwestern Ohio boy, are you not?
Yes, that's correct. I was born in Hicksville to begin with, and then my family moved to a farm southeast of Bryan when I was about a year old, and that's where I grew up. I graduated from Stryker High School, went to Northwest State Community College and got my associate's degree in electromechanical engineering there, and then went on to the Defiance College and got my bachelor's degree in business administration. But I started with the city of Bryan back in 1980 and worked for Bryan Municipal Utilities until 1997.
Wow. What position you started with? Where did you start?
I started as a part-time engineering assistant, or engineering aide they called it, while I was going to Northwest State Community College. Okay. And then after I graduated, went on full-time there, worked in the engineering area, helped with electric and water crews back at that time until I went over to the water plant. Daryl Stockberger had been the water plant superintendent, and Daryl left to go to Falls City, Nebraska, and I moved over there. Daryl and Joe Machinsky had helped a number of us get our Ohio EPA operator's licenses, so I had an operator's license and moved over there, worked over there until I think exclusively until about 1989. I became the water superintendent, so I was over both the water and water treatment and water distribution, and then I became the director of utilities in 1993.
Wow, that's
long time ago.
Isn't that amazing? It's
Yeah.
hard Mike Freeman sat in here with the hospital, and we sat and talked about something, and it's hard to imagine that things are now.
Yeah.
Are 30 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
25 years ago.
Yeah. Somewhere along the line, I went from being one of the young pups to one of the old curmudgeons, I guess, so to speak, of the organization.
How do we slow that down?
Yeah, I wish I knew. I wish I knew. But it's been great all along.
Now, at that point in time, you got an opportunity to move and take a similar position. Is that
right?
I'm remembering?
That's correct. I enjoyed my work here. Enjoyed the community very much. I was young, had a couple of young children at the time, and another one on the way, and got approached by a headhunter back in 1997. Ended up going to Austin, Minnesota from here, and that was a city of about 22,000 people, and I had the electric, water, and natural gas utilities up there. So
yeah, that had to be unique.
Yeah, it was.
Had natural gas on top of it.
Yeah. So I've had a couple of forays in that. Most recently, before coming back to Bryan, I was down at Hamilton, Ohio. It's a city of about 62,000 people, halfway between Dayton and Cincinnati in Butler County. And there I had the electric, water, wastewater, natural gas. And we also had a telecommunications ring where we leased dark fiber. And so kind of involved in all of those things. And also had the municipal cable TV and internet system when I was the general manager of Wyandotte Municipal Services in Wyandotte, Michigan. So had a little bit of experience in just about all of those utilities.
Yeah, that's ideal. Because now you come back to Bryan, a seasoned veteran,
right,
with a utility that has everything but gas.
Right,
because we don't have gas here, which
that's
is
correct.
A great job.
Yep.
But you have the communications now, you have the water, you have the electric, so you have a background and good experience behind you for all those projects. It had to make you feel good, I think, to come back because you still have family around the area, don't you?
That's That's correct. I still have family and friends, a lot of friends, that I've maintained over the last 20 years while I've been gone. My father is 85 years old and had been doing pretty well until the last couple of years, and unfortunately has been a victim of Alzheimer's disease. And so he had made me his power of attorney, and so I was trying to deal with a lot of those things from about 3 hours away, which didn't work very well when you're dealing with legal and medical and financial issues. So it was certainly one of the appeals of coming back here, one of the things that appealed to me.
Well, and you know what? This is a unique area. Every area is unique. I had this conversation with a number of people because they'll say, well, this only happens up here. Well, no, what we're talking about right now happens everywhere. Okay?
Yeah,
but
right.
there are certain things to every little community, whether you're in Hamilton, Ohio,
right,
or whether you're in Bryan, Ohio, that are unique to Hamilton or to Bryan.
Right.
And so when you're looking for a person, because for my money in this town, obviously, when you look at some of the big manufacturers around town, the people who are running those companies have a special spot in this town. The mayor of the city of Bryan has a special spot in this town. The utility director in this town also has a very special job because it's very unique to have your own services like this for a town this size.
Yeah, I agree. I think what I say to a lot of folks is, we are still a relatively small city, but the operation that we have is pretty complex in that you do have the telecommunications utility that most cities do not have. And in our electric operation, many times they don't have local generating facilities anymore. And of course, we have not only the power plant, which we've operated and maintained with new and improved units since 1896, but you also have the Auglaize hydroelectric plant that we operate and the solar field not too far from the radio station.
Yes, right
here.
around the corner.
Yeah.
Well, and Dak, were you here? You weren't here when the radio station was solar? You were just a kid at that point.
Yeah, I was still in high school when that started, but so I remember it.
It's unique that this area would be have a history like that.
Yeah.
It goes all the way back to the 70s.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And the things that you mentioned as well with some of these manufacturers that are, internationally known, and they got their start here. Their corporate headquarters are still here. Bryan has been a real entrepreneurial area in that regard. And of course, there's many of them that have not been around 100 years, like an Ohio Art or Bard Manufacturing, for example, or Spangler Candy, but have been here since the 70s or the 50s, So a lot of companies that have got their start here and have grown up and been very successful for many, many years.
Yeah, it really is a neat little town, and it's good to have you back in town with us right now. It's about 18 minutes after the hour of 11 o'clock. I have Kevin Maynard with me here as the utility director for the city of Bryan. I need to pay some bills, Kevin, in this business, and also do some O&N news, so we'll step away for just a minute. When we come back, I do want to talk about more specifics in the utility and get a perspective as to where you think we're going and what we're doing and how we're doing even right now as you've come back to town and take a look at what we're doing here at BMU. It's, as I said, 19 minutes now after 11. We'll be back with Kevin Maynard after this. reasonable. They were very, very cheap. In fact, when I first went to work with BMU, I think we had the most reasonable power costs anywhere. Period.
You're right,
It was
right.
just about as good as it got.
Yeah.
Nowadays, that competitive advantage between you and, say, Toledo Edison, it's not as great. In
Right.
fact, I don't know where kilowatt hour pricing is right now, but I've had people tell me that they're very competitive,
Yeah.
and in some spots, maybe Toledo Edison might be even a little cheaper than what Bryan Municipal Utility or a lot of the AMPO members are at this
Right.
point in time.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about the electric rate business. How do we fix rates, and why maybe would our power rates be a little higher now than what we'd like them to be?
That's a great question. I went over some of this stuff with the board and some of our local industry last fall. I think the thing that really changed was the industry changed, not so much that Bryan changed. I think everybody is probably paying more than they used to pay, regardless of who your provider is. And part of that was the changes that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has enacted over the last 20 or 30 years. Some of it is more environmental awareness and consciousness. We went through a long period of time in this country when you got out of the post-World War II era where electric use increased rapidly. And, we had larger and larger centralized generating stations that were built, and you could still achieve a lot of economies of scale, engineering-wise and otherwise, I guess I should say. And when all of the energy crisis occurred in the early 70s, there were a lot of plants still being built. So we saw some slowdown beginning at that time with electric growth. So there was a lot of surplus capacity out on the market. And back at that time, the way the electric industry worked, you couldn't buy power as a municipal utility from just anybody because you couldn't bring it over somebody else's transmission system, high voltage transmission system. So we were, for a number of years, connected to the Toledo Edison system, and a lot of the local residents may recall that have been around for, back at this time, in the mid to late 70s, those electric prices skyrocketed as Toledo Edison was involved in its nuclear generation building program, and that resulted then in 1982 in the city of Bryan building what is called the Marquis Corridor. It's a high voltage transmission line 10.5 miles to American Electric Power, or Ohio Power as it was called at that time. We built that line, converted from Toledo Edison's service to AEP's service, and cut rates an average of 23% across the board.
Right. Yes.
And that competitive advantage continued for many, many years because when you dealt with AEP at that time, it was a cost-plus basis. That all changed beginning in the late 1980s with some of the changes that I mentioned with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, where it became a market-based business.
Okay.
So instead, it wasn't what's our cost and then we'll add a small margin of profit on there. It's what can we sell it to and who's going to be the highest bidder on this. And so opening that up to market influences was supposed to result in decreased costs for everyone. But I think anyone that's followed the electric industry can see that there are some advantages that have occurred, but there's also what we believe are some things that were not so good. And so I think to maintain high reliability, you've seen some of those prices increase significantly. In Bryan's case, I think that AEP wholesale contract where we were buying power for approximately 3 cents a kilowatt hour expired in 2006, and the price the next year went to 6.2 cents, so it doubled. And this is the result of that change in the market. It wasn't that all of a sudden AEP didn't have power available anymore. It's that they could sell it to whoever wanted to buy it. And what was a important market for them was the eastern part of the United States, where power supply costs were more. So if you had your choice of selling it to people in Bryan, Ohio for 3 cents or selling it to someone on the eastern coast for twice that, you're going to sell it to as a investor-owned utility, and it's private business, so that's the way the market works. But that, of course, then has been a challenge, is trying to, over that period since 2006, I think, on the Board of Public Affairs part, take a look and evaluate, because they saw the market volatility and I believe the impact that that made on our community, having that kind of a change in power supply costs. So since that time, they've been working on trying to diversify their power supply portfolio, where they didn't have one big contract that was subject to those kinds of fluctuations. And they also took a stance of trying to invest in more longer-term resources. So the city has, since that time, invested in a number of hydroelectric facilities, for example, the solar field that we mentioned a little bit earlier, the AMP Fremont Energy Center, which is a natural gas-fired combined cycle plant in Fremont, Ohio, as well as the Prairie State Energy Campus, which is a new coal-fired generating facility down southeast of St. Louis. So now you've got this very diverse mix of resources, and some of those plants have multiple generating units. So again, then you've sort of hedged your bet. If one of those goes down, it's not going to drastically impact your cost. And through that whole thing, even with the coal-fired generation, it's much, much cleaner coal-fired generation than the average fleet in the Midwest. So they've really reduced their environmental footprint significantly through that, stabilized their costs, tried to limit the upswing price risk on market purchases there, and have a much cleaner fleet than the average generating fleet in the Midwest. So if you have a carbon tax enacted or a cap and trade, the impacts on Bryan customers will not be as significant as it may be for some other utilities in the Midwest. So I think that that's really kind of been the big change. We saw that increase from the 3 cent to roughly 6 cent power. And it's really sort of hovered around that cost just about ever since. Some years a little bit more, some years a little bit less. This year, we're projecting that delivered cost is going to be about 6.2 cents. So not a lot different. Well, that's exactly what the contract was in 2006. So in that time, as I mentioned, instead of being on this one big contract with AEP, we've got this very diverse set of power supply resources, much more environmentally friendly. And we still have some market purchases that we make, but that represents about 25 or 30% of our purchases now. And it's you don't want to go overboard with it too, because our community, unfortunately lost companies like the Aero Corporation at one point. And if you're overinvested in those resources and you lose load, then you're trying to sell that power that you've committed to out on the market, and that could put you at financial risk as well.
I don't think most people understand when you start to talk that way, because when you get into several of the projects with AMPO, you take not only an investment that you make into that organization, okay, but you also are required to take so much power back.
That's correct.
You say, yeah, I want to be part of it. I send all my dollars in and I invest into this whole thing. But
that's correct.
But you're required to take whatever that contract is,
right,
aren't you?
That's absolutely correct. And so we try to take a look at the various resources there and not overcommit to any one of them. And again, I think that the board has done a pretty good job over that period since 2006 in trying to diversify those resources, but not get overly committed. And I've seen communities that have done that. In fact, Hamilton, where I came from, was one of those communities that had committed for more resources before I got there. Had committed for more resources than they had load, in anticipation that their load growth was going to continue. And unfortunately, they lost a couple of large paper mills there, and all of a sudden their load decreased significantly, and they're in the unenviable situation of trying to sell hydroelectric power into the market at a loss.
Yeah. It becomes a real tricky projection when you deal with something like that.
That's right.
Now, I think though the one thing when I first started with BMU it was really just more of a crapshoot as to where power was going to be when your contracts ended, because you
Right.
didn't have the diversity.
That's right.
So
it was all one big. You had all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah,
to,
and now you
to
go
some
from
extent.
3 cents to 6.
Right.
And there's not much that anybody can do at
That's
that
right.
at that moment.
That's
with,
right.
with their cost at that
That's
point.
right.
The hydro dam down in Defiance. You know, that's one that gets cussed and discussed over a cup of coffee
Right.
all the time.
Right.
Is it a worthwhile project for us? It's an expensive project. There's always things going bad with a hydro dam. There's something that breaks here or something that breaks there. It's a working plant.
Yeah. Right.
From your perspective now, being on the job and being around this, is the hydro business a good one for us?
Oh, absolutely. I think that the part that people don't see is, you know, our power supply bill, whether we're generating it ourselves or we're buying it from somebody else, all of those things happen at all of those plants. The difference is you don't see them because they're happening in, you know, along the Ohio River or something like that. So I think that led to a lot of maybe perhaps misunderstanding when people saw some of those costs. With hydroelectric, you know, it's a big capital investment because you've got a lot of concrete, brick, you know, these turbines and generators. And, you know, where you really make hay with it, so to speak, is that there's no fuel cost. It's the water, it turns those turbines, so it's free. So you're not paying for coal, you're not paying for natural gas, any of those kinds of things. And these types of improvements are very long-lived. The Auglaize hydroelectric project was constructed in 1912, and it's still generating power today. And some of those turbines are nearly 100 years old down there. So, you know, maybe you spend several $1 million in those kinds of improvements, but they may last for 100 years. So when you take a look at the cost per year or per kilowatt hour over the life of the improvements, it's very, very low. And that's why hydro remains a very viable generating technology in the U.S. today, once you get the capital costs paid for it. And that's where we're at with the Auglaize project, is that we don't have any debt on it at all. So it's a very viable unit for us, both from an energy cost standpoint, and we're also able to store water at most of the times of the year down there. So we use it even when we were having these recent peak alerts where we were asking people to conserve. We were running those generators down there during those peak hours to reduce the electric load in the community, so it also saves us on those capacity and transmission costs. And between that and the generators that we have at the plant here in town, we're expecting to save $4.5 million on our power supply costs because we have those assets here. And we've perhaps not done a good enough job of communicating all of those things to the public. And some of that has changed over the years, too. One of the benefits, perhaps, of the changes in the electric industry because we have those generating assets here. If we didn't, I had mentioned that our power supply bill is about $12 million a year. If we didn't have that, it'd be $16.5 million a year. Yeah. So that's part of how we've been able to maintain that cost fairly level since 2006.
Tell folks about peak shaving, because you know, you always come out when it's a hot day, when it's a cold day, whatever. When we hit extremes. Yeah. We're always asking people to turn the thermostat down or turn the lights off or do this at a different time. Explain that to folks, because I don't think a lot of folks understand why you would ask something like that.
Well, that's a great question, Jim. One of the changes in the electric industry from 20 years ago that you were talking about is that today you have to, when the peak system demand occurs, let's say on AEP's system, then you get billed based on what your load is. And in that case, I'm talking about the city of Bryan's load at that 1 hour that it's the highest in the entire year. Okay. So for us, having those generating resources is one way that we reduce that demand. And that's how we save this $4.5 million a year. But the other part of it is we ask customers to conserve during those times. And customers reducing their load helps us in the same way as firing up a generator. But again, there's no fuel cost, there's no mechanical cost there. So if people are able to do it, then it saves money on that transmission cost. We also get billed when the entire Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland independent system operator that AEP is part of when their peak is. But there are 5 coincident peaks that occur during the year there, so the highest 5. So we have to meet all of those in addition to the 1 coincident peak on the AEP system. So that's where we ask people to conserve during those times, because again, we have this generation, and our staff have done a great job, I think, of operating and maintaining it during those peaks, but there's always the possibility that something won't fire up that day or won't be able to operate at full load, and that's where customer conservation becomes just critically important, because if you miss that 1 coincident peak, again, for AEP, you're going to pay it in your transmission bill for the entire next year. If you miss one of those 5 CPs or coincident peaks on the PJM system, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, then you get the same thing, but it'll be what your average of those 5 coincident peaks are. It's a hugely important part of our total cost here. Next year, I think those total costs were estimated at about $5 million.
Wow.
So again, whatever we're able to do to reduce those Brian's load during those peaks helps save everybody money. It's not been a question of reliability, so when we ask folks to do that, it's not because there's going to be a blackout or anything. It's purely a financial situation for us and of course for every customer that pays an electric bill.
Yeah, and those normally are happening on a 2 o'clock in the afternoon, July 32nd, when it's 180 degrees and every plant's running, every business is running, everybody's working the air conditioning.
Yeah, that's absolutely
kind of
correct.
load.
In the summertime, that's very much the case. The peak is driven by air conditioner use, so it's typically those days where they have what they call high misery index, the combination of the temperature and humidity, and so those peaks often occur in the late afternoon, so we're often asked to generate from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. on those days. The wintertime peaks that we were seeing here right after Christmas are heating, and folks might say, well, don't we have natural gas service? We do, but even if you do have natural gas heating, you still have blowers and fans and all of that stuff, but I think a lot of folks don't realize how much electric heat there is out there as well. This goes back to that early 70s energy crisis. There was a time there, I think from about 1973 to 78, where there was a ban nationwide on installing new natural gas heat. So there are still a lot of sections of Bryan that have electric heat. And, the industry, of course, is a big part of it. But again, even if the industry wasn't operating, or some of them weren't operating at full capacity after Christmas there that week, there's a lot of folks that go on shutdown, we were still hitting a peak that was greater than our summertime peak.
Yeah.
Because it was so frigid cold.
Yeah. You guys are running, and I know this to be a fact, that you're running pretty much as lean and as mean as you can with all your staffs.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
The electric department, when I was there, had more bodies in it than it does right now.
Yeah.
I think the water department had another body or two, and when you're a small department like the water communications, one extra person is maybe 20%, 30% of your staff at that point in time. Right. Do you foresee that to continue, or do we need more electric workers at BMU right now?
Well, I think, you raise a good point there. I think there's roughly the same number of people that were employed as there were 20 years ago, and we added the telecommunications utility in the meantime. So I think that, we've taken a look at how to best utilize those resources, and I believe that we've got a real good staff that does a great job. I think our reliability is pretty high here in the community. I think the thing that the board has taken a look at that may be different than what we've done in the past is that we've put together a succession plan. We're trying to take a look at the number of retirements, and fully, nearly, it's 48%, 46%, something like that, of our employees will be eligible to retire in the next 10 years, and some of them much sooner than that. So rather than waiting for people to leave before they look for a replacement, the board, I think, is strategically taking a look at when do we fill or add some people to these positions to train and ensure a smooth transition to the future. Because again, as we discussed a little earlier, Bryan does have that communications department. We do have all of that local generation that makes it unique. And so if you're out there looking for somebody that already has that kind of industry knowledge and experience, it's probably a little more difficult to find than if you were just looking for someone to operate your water plant or, an electric line worker. So that's probably the biggest difference between 20 years ago and today.
Yeah, yeah. You decided here recently not to send some of your guys down to help with the disaster relief. And in some folks' mind, that was a good thing. In some folks' mind, it was, gosh, man, why in the heck aren't we down helping those people right now?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think the thing that the community has a long history of working on mutual aid, providing aid to other municipal electric utilities when they have a disaster that occurs, whether that's a tornado or in this case, this was hurricane damage in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And in fact, John Curtin, who was the director of utilities in Bryan in the 1980s, was instrumental in starting that mutual aid program for AMP members. So it stretches all the way back to that. The things that I think that were different in this case was that we have mutual aid contracts already in place for AMP members and for non-AMP members through our national association, the American Public Power Association. In this case, APPA didn't have an agreement in place that allowed us to send help to the U.S. Virgin Islands. And they were trying to make arrangements to transport bucket trucks. So they were asking us to make a decision literally within just a couple of days of finding out that there was a request for this mutual aid. And, it was sort of every person or every community for themselves in negotiating an agreement with the U.S. Virgin Islands. So, when the board's taking a look at this, when the city attorney's taking a look at it, and they're being asked to try to visualize what all the possible things are that could go wrong here when you're trying to put a contract together as an individual community versus the collective approach that we've done in the past, there were just too many questions, I think, on the board's part to move forward with that in the time frame they were given to make a decision.
Yeah, yeah. That's a long way to send your guys.
Right.
There's no doubt about that.
It is.
It's not like just sending them down to Florida or North Carolina.
Absolutely. And I think, just looking at, because this wasn't on the mainland, they were asking us to sign power of attorney agreements to allow people to drive our bucket trucks onto these barges that they were going to take over to the U.S. Virgin Islands. And I couldn't help but think, well, what if there's a storm while they're transporting them and our bucket truck ends up on the bottom of the sea? What are the insurance implications of that? And when you're even in Florida, if we had a problem back here, we just would call our folks and say, come home. And I mean, they're a day trip away. That wouldn't be the case in the U.S. Virgin Islands. We had to rely on others to transport this equipment to the island, and then they would have had to return it. So, if we had a need back home, there was not going to be any quick way to get those folks and our equipment back to Bryan.
Yeah. Let's shift over to the communications side,
okay,
because that's probably the hottest topic in this town right now.
Okay,
with internet speeds, cable channels.
Sure.
We were fortunate enough to be part of starting everything 20 years ago. It's hard to imagine, but it's been 20 years ago that the cable and communication system started.
That's right.
The guts of that cable system pretty much, in a lot of cases, are 20 years old. Electronics out in the field, lasers, amplifiers, things like that. There are things there that now, back in our day, we said every 10 years we need an upgrade. We need to pretty much, the system becomes obsolete at 10, and you have to start looking to change things because of decisions that have been made, not by your doing, but in the process of this last 20 years. This thing needs a big facelift right now. Are we going to get one? Are we going to see things change, do you think, Kevin?
Well, I think that across the utilities, what we've really been talking a lot about, and the board's been very involved in, is looking at our capital planning. Because, you know, we want to make sure that reliability is one of our focuses. Price and reliability are probably our two biggest charges here, right, as a municipal utility. And so to be able to do that, you've got to reinvest in your systems. So the question becomes, how much do we need to spend every year? And a lot of that comes down to, we look at a couple of different guidelines for that. First is depreciation expense, but secondly, also taking a look at the estimated service life of these components. And as you mentioned, in the telecommunications industry, electronics particularly don't have a particularly long service life, or they may do the job for a long time, but newer technology provides greater opportunities for the community.
Sure.
So even with the fiber optic cable, if you're taking a look at the estimated service life of that, I think most people would say probably 25 years is a good estimated service life. Well, this year will be 20 years that our system has been in place. So, you know, our staff is taking a look at trying to look to the future and maybe try to see the future 20 years hence and say, okay, if we're redesigning this system and we're reinstalling new fiber in this community, how do we need to configure that? What do we need to do differently? And that's part of the challenge to it. But our folks believe that bandwidth in the future being, maybe even if we look back at the history of our organization, you know, the water department was created 126 years ago, 1892. And we've really been in the infrastructure business through that time, and we've got great history with it. We're really good at it, and I think that extends into the communications area. So if you believe the future is not as much about what cable channels we're offering, but more trying to make sure that you don't take a back seat living in Bryan to any other part of the country as far as internet availability, being able to get that bandwidth at a high reliable degree and have that at a competitive cost, then that maybe is a different way of looking at it than, you know, whether we're providing all of the cable services or they're coming over.
Sure. Netflix.
Yeah, exactly.
All of a sudden, because the world has changed. There's
Exactly.
No doubt about that.
Yeah.
Back in the day, it was I need more cable channels and I need that 56K modem. That
Right. Exactly. Exactly. The dial-up service for internet. And so, you know, I think that when you look at the trends, and you've mentioned Netflix and some of those other a la carte services, that trend will probably continue, because one of the things that you've heard people complain the most about is, well, I've got 500 channels, but I only really care about 5 of them, right?
Exactly.
And that kind of a service, Netflix or Hulu, Vudu, all of those different types of streaming services probably will continue to grow in popularity, and I think most cable providers will at some point be forced to rethink how they approach all of this. And it's really tough. You know, we just did a cable rate adjustment that was primarily driven not by, you know, the HBOs of the world or Cinemaxes or, you know, the Tennis Channel, but more by those channels that, you know, people used to get and still get for free by putting an antenna up.
Right.
You know, the ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox affiliates in Toledo and Fort Wayne. You know, our cost for those retransmitting those stations, the increase this year was about $5 per customer per month. And years ago, even when we started the cable system, that wasn't the case.
They were free.
That's right. You could still get them for free. Right, exactly. Yeah. And the law, again, changed, and now, you know, if you want to carry them, and they are very popular with our customers, so you don't really have a choice of saying we're not going to carry them. But the problem is that the rate keeps going up, and you know, you could be like some of the satellite providers I know don't carry all of the Toledo stations.
Right.
They're blacked out because they can't reach an agreement that the provider believes is fair. And in our case, you know, we had no choice. We hadn't done an increase for a couple of years on the cable rate. But what we tried to do then to offset that for the customers that were taking advantage of both cable TV and internet services was to reduce the internet cost by more than what the cable rate increase was. So if you're taking both of those services in the community, then your bill will go down beginning in about a month or so.
Yeah. You know, that's a difficult situation, those off airs, because in the contract, they're supposed to be able to provide you a quality signal
Right.
to your tower out here.
Right.
When they went from an analog signal to a digital signal, that digital signal is not as strong as that analog signal, and we've always had the tiling here and all those
Right.
things.
Right.
So that has been the thing that's irritated an old cable guy like me.
Sure.
Is why do we pay a channel 11 an exorbitant $2 to
Right.
$3 a head?
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
To get me a signal that I can't maintain.
Right.
Even,
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's been the frustrating part. We're a small guy, I understand that, but
Right.
that I think has been more frustrating when it comes to off airs and
Sure.
just paying them.
Yeah.
First of all, because they all initially were must carries, which
Yeah.
made they were free.
Right.
And then they all decided to be retrans, which
Right.
means I'm allowed to charge you now.
Right.
But the thing that I think we've missed is the fact that, doggone it, you got to give me a good signal.
Yeah.
And you're not.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And you double my rates and you triple my rates, but you're still not giving me that signal.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely.
And that part is the one that just, I think, to me frustrates the most.
Sure.
Electronic wise, I know they've talked a little bit about trying to upgrade some to help with the bandwidth issues, because it's not
Correct.
it's an issue that's very difficult and most people don't understand it.
Yeah.
But it's one that some new electronics introduced into the system right now would probably greatly enhance.
That's absolutely correct, and it's in our budget for this year, Jim. What the plan is first of all, increasing the bandwidth available to us from our bandwidth provider, which is Sprint right now.
Sure.
So we expect that at the next Board of Public Affairs meeting, or perhaps the one following, but we're shooting for the next one, the first one in February, to take a agreement for the board's consideration that would significantly increase that bandwidth availability to us, and then our communications folks will be purchasing the necessary equipment to take advantage of that bandwidth. And what we expect to be offering, we'll continue to offer the up to 8 megabit speed, but we expect to be offering up to 30 megabits, and depending upon how that bandwidth gets utilized, perhaps it'll be more than that as well.
Yeah. And you know what, for everybody listening right now, because you see the 100 megabits and you see
Right.
all these different I've gone through this numerous times with numerous people.
Yeah.
If I can give you a 20 to 30 meg pipe to your
Right.
house,
Right.
99% of the people listening to us right now will be delighted.
That's correct.
Okay, because they're using 6 or 8 or 10.
That's correct.
Even if they're
Right.
sitting with their Netflix on 2 different TV sets.
That's right.
And then you got the weird guys out there every now and then that will just absolutely suck the bandwidth up, no matter how big you want to put the pipe out there.
That's right.
And we always thought they were good Time Warner customers at
Yeah.
that time. How's that?
Well, I think that's absolutely right. It's one of those things that that sounds like it's a detriment to our customers, but you're correct. For most people that are residential users,
Yeah.
that 30 megabit is more than enough. Even if you're doing streaming of movies or doing some gaming, it's not going to. There's exceptions to every rule.
Sure.
But as we look forward, I think that's one of those questions that we take a look at, is trying to make sure that we offer as good a services as other providers do at as competitive a price as they do. And I'm not talking about the introductory, we're going to steal you from somebody for 6 months or 12 months and we'll give you this cheap rate and then we'll sock you with something bigger after that. Our costs have always been what they are, and they've been very stable. I think that internet rate had not been adjusted since 2007.
Yes,
but the bandwidth had increased significantly since that time. So, that's, I think with us, where we're at with it is that there's no gimmicks here. What you hear is what you got. And, all of this stuff is discussed in open meetings of the board, which are also broadcast over our cable system.
Right.
And we have a YouTube channel that has them as well if people want to watch them. So I think those are all great ways for people to keep informed about the progress. But you'll be seeing a lot of things over the next few months as we move through those changes and start the installation. And we've got 4 different sectors of town that will be working through installing this new equipment. But our plan is by the end of 2018, all of our customers will have access to that up to 30 megabit service.
Fantastic. Well, that's good. Kevin, it's hard to imagine, but we've burned an hour already. How's that? Isn't that hard to believe?
Yeah.
And there's still things I'd love to talk to you about,
Sure.
so you need to come back and talk to me some more.
Sure.
I appreciate your openness. I appreciate your honesty. I'm really happy that you're here.
Well, thanks.
It's great to have you back in the community, and hopefully, again, I don't work at BMU anymore, but the heart's still there. I still love the idea, and I do think that our local utility, does work awful hard to try to take care of the people in Bryan.
Yeah.
And I really do appreciate that. And even though there are times when people will disagree with one another, I think it's the neat thing about it is we can get a guy like Kevin Maynard to come in here and answer the questions that we've got.
Yeah, and that's what we are there for. I think, we don't have any other motivation for it, but I do think that's one of the great things is that, you can sit here and disagree about this stuff. You can make your views known on social media. You can make them known at the Board of Public Affairs or City Council meetings. You don't get that opportunity with some of the larger private companies. If you tried to get a hold of the board of directors of some of those, you would never, you would never even get, to the next level hardly, with that. So, that's one of the great things. Our service is all around here as well, too. Our folks that do this work, that maintain these systems, they're all area residents. They have family and friends here, too. And so there's just a different standard of care there, I believe.
No doubt. Kevin Maynard has been our guest here for this hour. We appreciate his time. We'll have him back later. Right now, it's just afternoon right here on the Q 96.5 FM.